How do they do this? How can they get this wide? Canon, making moves on the RF mount. Hello everyone, my name's Josh from Videos by Josh, and today we're going to be talking about Canon's newly announced RF 10 to 20mm f4L IS STM zoom lens. This new lens is a full-frame, ultra-wide rectilinear zoom lens for Canon RF mount mirrorless cameras. And you can bet I'm pretty excited about it. This looks like a pretty impressive milestone. How is this a milestone? Well, Canon is saying specifically that this lens is the world's first rectilinear zoom lens with 10mm coverage. In regular speak, Canon is essentially saying that this lens is the widest auto-focusing zoom lens that also maintains straight lines and doesn't distort the image. And that's exactly what they mean when they say rectilinear. A rectilinear lens is a photographic lens that produces images with straight lines. Rectilinear lenses are specially corrected for distortion so that straight lines are reproduced accurately even on the margins of pictures. And anyone who's shot on the ultra-wide ends of lenses know that, once you get down in the 20s and the 10s, things can get a bit squirrely with your straight lines. And when you pair that with some of the optical compromises you introduce with a zoom lens as opposed to a prime, I can see Canon having their handful keeping this lens in check and keeping these images clean. Looking at the samples though, I'm impressed. I'm impressed at how well they're able to keep it in check. I don't know what some of these samples have undergone, whether or not they've had corrections in certain photo editing softwares or what have you, but I'm fairly certain that the images or video coming out of this lens will be professional grade and high quality. I mean, have we come to expect anything less from the L series? Even highly popular and well-loved lenses like Canon's offerings in the 24 to 70s have distortion on the lower end in 24, and that's a 24. We're going all the way down to 10. It's just amazing how wide they can get lenses now, and to maintain a zoom and autofocus, no doubt, this is incredible. Canon is preaching 130 degrees of field coverage. I wanted to make a point here because I started looking up, how wide is this lens? Obviously, I don't have it in hand, but I didn't realize how much wider 10mm is from a more standard 12mm wide-angle lens. A 10mm lens offers approximately 1.4 times more imaging field than a 12mm lens. It's absolutely insane. Let's continue with the lens specifics. So it's a full frame lens and it has image stabilization. 5 stops inside the lens, even more when you pair it with a body. Not as intense as some of the other telephoto lenses that we've seen. 5 stops, still plenty of stabilization. Every time I see that red ring, I just love L glass, man. There's something about it. Can you tell I really miss shooting with my 24 to 70 Mark II EF Canon lens? Like, I really enjoyed that lens. It was like my bread and butter. I shot on it a lot when I was shooting adapted on Sony, and then prior to that on Panasonic. It's bringing me back. Canon says that this lens is going to excel greatly for content types that require a wide point of view, and they cite landscapes, cityscapes, architecture, real estate, and weddings. Can you imagine shooting a wedding on a 10 to 20? I mean, yeah, you could do establishing shots, but can you imagine getting like a hero shot of the bride on 10mm? Why do I look so close? Now, this lens has been positioned to replace a relatively old predecessor, and that is the Canon EF 11 to 24mm f4L lens. And these lenses are, despite having very similar focal ranges, also very different. One of the biggest differences is the size. Now, this 10 to 20 is less than half the weight of the outgoing 11 to 24 EF. And that's just incredible because that wasn't a particularly heavy lens. I mean, sure, it was heavy for a shorter, stoutier wide lens, but this lens is positively featherlight. Like 570 grams is not a lot of lens to be carrying around. I'm also excited to see Canon's STM autofocus in this lens, as I think it's a welcome, if not industry standard, industry leading addition. I love Canon's autofocus. I love Sony's autofocus. I think both systems work incredibly well. It was good to see that on this lens, although I'm not surprised. Like, what are you gonna do, not make an autofocus lens in your L lineup? I don't know how that would go over. I can't stress enough that this is not a fisheye lens, even though it's got fisheye focal length. So common, we're used to these bulbous lenses that do advertise super low focal lengths to get an entire room shot or some crazy wide angle, and this at 10 is in that range, but it keeps the line straight or maintains its image at relatively low distortion. That I need to see. And there are sample images from this lens that advertise exactly that, and they look great. I can't fathom how they made a lens this light and this versatile in the low end. This is actually a super super interesting release from Canon. Now, there are competitors across brand lines, like Sony's recently-ish released 12 to 24mm GM, and that's an incredible lens as well. It comes in at an incredible price. Anyway, I'm muddying the waters a bit. I already explained how different 10mm to 12mm can be. If you're looking for a wide-angle lens, this looks great. Now, some wide-angle shooters will be fretting at the f4 minimum aperture for this lens. Now, I don't think that's a big deal. I'm on the record as being a proponent, an advocate for f4 as being a professional minimum aperture. You can do tons of great work with f4 and above. Not a big deal. And the predecessor, the outgoing 11 to 24, was also an f4 lens, so wide-angle shooters are probably accustomed to that. But if you do find yourself in need of a 2.8 aperture on a zoom lens, Canon has rounded out their product stack very well. They already have an RF 15 to 35 f2.8 that, from what I've heard, does quite well. Taking a look at the front side of the lens, you have a bulbous front element, and this is exactly what we can expect from a lens this wide. And as a result, you can't put any front filters on this lens. The lens also maintains a very good close focusing distance of only 9.8 inches, which I think is perfectly adequate in a lens of this caliber. One thing that's new on this lens and has been a hot feature on upcoming lenses is the inclusion of a focus point sensor, which enables the precision return to a set focus distance when the camera is powered on or off. So you can turn it on, turn it off, and your button map will always be to that one set focus because the lens remembers. And I can see that being really helpful if you're operating your camera via tether or app, if you're doing some sort of hyperlapse, or if maybe you're using it as a studio cam. I don't know. You can do whatever you want with it. It's an added feature. It does not detract. It's really cool. But I like the look of this lens and particularly the build. I love the knurled quality behind the lens hood. The red ring looks as vibrant as ever. The black body and standard Canon branding looks on point. And I mean, it's just a really small lens, so I think you're gonna have a great time carrying it around. Let's talk about price. Now, this lens is coming in significantly cheaper than the Sony 12 to 24. Now, I know that's not a completely direct comparison, but it is going to be about $500 or $600 cheaper. This lens will also be undercutting in price the still for sale Canon EF 11 to 24mm wide-angle lens, and I'm gonna be honest, this is a no-brainer. If you were looking at that lens, this lens appears to offer you even more at a lower price point. Of course, you can't use it in similar adapted situations as you would be able to an EF lens, but if you're shooting on RF, no-brainer. So what are my final thoughts on this lens? Well, let me just say that I'm really interested in the focal lengths that Canon has been pushing with their latest releases and even going a bit farther back. When I was learning about photography almost a decade ago, and I was learning on Canon systems, I was taught the standard established focal lengths for zoom. You know, you got your standard 24 to 70, your ever trusty 70 to 200, and on the wide, maybe you have a 16 to 35, maybe you go a bit lower with that Canon 11 to 24. These were numbers that were ingrained in my head and largely mirrored on other systems like Nikon and Sony. And then when Canon transitioned to the RF mount, I started to see this, the historic camera brand making interesting moves in the space that I didn't think was possible. And the first source I'm going to cite for that is when Canon released that 28 to 70 f2. Do you remember that? That lens, making that, I didn't even think it was possible because for so long camera brands had been saying 24 to 70 2.8. This is what professionals use. And then Canon comes out with a 28 to 70 f2. And I was super intrigued by that. And now you're going into the wide angle category and you're pushing the boundaries even more for what's possible on millimeters by going down to 10. Canon has made some really interesting glass, and it surprises me coming from a brand like them. When I think of interesting focal lengths or lenses that are off the beaten path, I think of third-party companies like Tamron making interesting versions of common lenses with some caveats and compromises. But now when I think of Canon, I can see them pushing the envelope in certain directions, pushing for more focal length, pushing for more light. I can see them making moves, and as a video production person, someone who inevitably will be using this equipment, I can applaud Canon for pushing the market on what is capable on these lenses. Moreover, pushing our expectations as customers as to what can be possible and what can be made. Who knows, maybe we'll see an even wider product down the line from another brand or what have you. But it's clear with this lens that Canon is pushing the envelope, pushing our expectations, and driving the market forward, and I appreciate that on this lens. But what do you guys think about the 10 to 20? This one's a really interesting one, and I'm glad Canon announced this one, because sometimes I don't think the wide angles get a lot of love. Like, people really love the extra fast telephotos and the portrait stuff, but when was the last time you went crazy over a wide angle lens? I don't know. I'm crazy about it. I want to see it and I want to use it in person. But let me know what you think. Leave a comment down below. I read all of them and I'll do my best to answer them. Until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.